dehydrated, he was lost, he was tired, he was possibly intoxicated still. I think looking around, if you knew this area, everywhere you look is going to be steep when you're looking upwards. I think it would be the path of least resistance for him to head downhill towards the ocean. And then
I got nightmares in my head, I fear thoughts build up until I can't feel. My mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper. I got nightmares in my head, I fear thoughts build up until.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. It's taken 30 days, but at last it seems to be sinking in that the treacherous terrain in northwest Tenerife is, well, treacherous. According to the Mail Online, a local villager said the place is a death trap for people who don't know what they're doing. Well, Jay really didn't know what he was doing. He didn't know where he was, he didn't know where he was going, and he didn't know what was waiting for him in terms of where he was going. According to the Mail Online, some of the gaps between the cliffs are only a few feet wide and hidden in shadows, possibly explaining how the 19-year-old's body was missed by earlier aerial searches. And that's obviously in terms of these ravines. Now, if you paid attention to some of the aerial footage when you had helicopters flying over these ravines, you could actually see just how convoluted and steep and treacherous and rugged they actually were. Going back to the article, Jay is believed to have lost his footing and fallen while desperately trying to climb through the ravine to try and return to his hotel. Now, the early position on this channel was that he was either in the ravine right by Musca. I think it's called the Musca Ravine, but it's basically the ravine that takes you to Musca Beach, or the one directly north of it. And so it turned out that he was in the one directly north of it. Also interesting, you heard this person from GB News saying that he possibly took the path of least resistance, going downhill. That was also the position of this channel on July 10th. I actually used those exact words. Now, you had a local saying this place is a death trap for people who don't know what they are doing. Well, if you think about Jay trying to return to his hotel, he was trying to return to his hotel, and of course, it wasn't a near miss. This was an enormous whopper of an error. He was way off course, not only going west instead of south, but also by starting off north instead of the opposite direction. The only part that he got right was to go west towards the sea. Villagers have speculated, according to the Mail Online, that he may have decided that it might have been quicker for him to find the coast and walk back along it, rather than trek along the winding road back through the mountains. Now, that's also something that was very clear early on, that he was trying to take shortcuts, that he'd already taken shortcuts. And there's a journalist from ITV who was saying, in terms of these switchbacks, in terms of this road, this very curvy, zigzagging road, there were paths between them, or what appeared to be some sort of terrain or channel between them that one could sort of go onto in order to not have to walk the whole squiggle that cars had to drive. And so obviously at the time, Jay was taking shortcuts. And what is a shortcut? What is a shortcut? A shortcut is a route that leads from one place to another and is quicker and more direct than the usual route. That's what he thought he was doing. That's what he thought he was doing, but if you're lost, you don't know that that is what you're doing. It's a quicker way of doing something in order to save time or effort. That's what he thought he was doing, and obviously he wasn't doing that. Jay's father also said something along the lines in the early days of the search that he doesn't understand why he would have done this. It didn't make any sense. It didn't add up. But the locals said, maybe he left the road and headed down a track into the Juan Lopez Valley after catching a glimpse of the sea in the distance. That's also what we were saying on this channel. That sea must have looked very tempting. The C was lower down. It symbolized his destination. He knew his hotel was in that direction. He knew his hotel was not near the mountains. And the C represented a kind of reprieve from the mountains. But of course, the sea on the other side of the mountains was still nowhere near where he needed to be. So why did he persist? Well, due to the folly of youth. Before we get to the rest of this analysis, if you haven't already subscribed to the channel, please do. Bear in mind, I want to take this analysis further. When we talk about trying to figure out what was going on in Jay's mind and his thoughts and why he did what he did. We're going to take this further in the next analysis, where we'll deal with us, why it's been so hard for us to accept what has happened. And it might seem like a simple enough question, but it's actually got quite a interesting and complicated answer. And so we'll be dealing with that, this whole idea of adding insult to injury, in the next episode. So look out for that. If you're enjoying this analysis, please like, share, leave a comment. You can also hit the thanks button, and let's continue. So as this route that he was taking was becoming more and more dangerous, more and more fraught, more and more treacherous, why did he persist? Couldn't he see that he'd made a mistake, that this wasn't the way he needed to go? So why did he keep going? Well, due to the folly of youth. Now, the path that he was on apparently came to an abrupt end after just half a mile. So he hadn't gone that far when he basically reached a dead end, what other people have referred to as a death trap. And that then led to him, he'd left the road, and then he took paths, and then he left the paths. Well, now he was continuing to do that. And now he was scrambling down a slope. There's no path. And then he started reaching rocky outcrops of the ravine at the end of the valley nearest the coastline. Now, according to the Mail Online, it is believed that he tried to climb up a ridge to carry on trying to reach the sea before stumbling and falling to his death. The sea must have seemed right over there, almost within reach. But just to reiterate, once again, he found himself in a bad situation. All he had to do was turn back and return the way he'd come. It's a matter of being rational, of using one's judgment. But what happened was his feelings overrode rational thought. I don't want to turn back. I'm tired. I don't want to have to, if I turn back, I've got to go uphill. It does mean that I don't know where I am, and I'm lost, and I haven't figured this out. And probably on top of that, he could hear the sea, perhaps even smell it. And he believed he was so very close. And perhaps as the crow flies, he was very close. Perhaps he was just half a mile away to go. But like many people following this case, believing very strongly and feeling very strongly about something doesn't make what you want a reality. And so his body was only found on Monday morning after a helicopter was used to winch search teams in and out of the ravine, which is just 2 miles from the road where he was last seen. According to the Mail Online, Spanish authorities confirmed yesterday that the body which was recovered was identified as being Jay from fingerprints. The fingerprints were likely recovered from his hotel room. Now, as I said, I do want to deal with why it's so hard to accept what happened to Jay, and it goes a lot deeper than I think many of us realize. It has to do with our schizophrenic attitude to nature in general. Yes, to nature. We become schizophrenic in our approach to reality when we disconnect our thinking process from reality. And when I say reality, another way of thinking about reality is nature. And so when we disconnect our thinking from nature, we think we are above it, or it is fragmented away from the systems and patterns of nature, including our own natures. And instead we start to believe in our own strong feelings about things. Well, then we do have a problem, and we are no longer in the real world. We are in the world of our own hearts and minds. And it feels good until, of course, reality catches up with us, which it invariably does. Now, as I say, in this analysis, I want to complete the process of trying to understand what Jay was thinking, because I think his immature and irrational way of thinking is also, to some extent, how others much older than Jay still think about the world today, and perhaps we can see it as a cautionary tale. Someone said, perhaps we will never know what Jay was thinking. Someone left this comment or words to that effect on the previous video. Well, it's extremely easy to tell what any person is thinking, even if we don't know someone from a bar of soap. Look at what someone does. Look at how they act. I must say, it's almost incomprehensible for me that somebody would say that on my channel. I mean, have you not watched a single Rex Human deep dive? Have you never heard references to Ernest Becker, the Pulitzer Prize-winning cultural anthropologist? Have you not read a single book that I've written? Because we so often do find out exactly what someone was thinking through their words, through their actions, through patterns that repeat themselves. What we do, why we do what we do, is determined by who we are. And so if you find out someone's identity, that is largely telling you what they are thinking, how they are reasoning. Who we are is largely the sum of what we do, and what we repeatedly do is a sign of our true identity. So who was Jay? He was someone who went to a lot of parties or raves. And besides being young, which is a big part of who he was, because his identity is still being formed, he still hasn't basically become who he is, he's becoming who he is. But a big part of that is someone who can't be accused of taking life too seriously or being too sober about life. In short, for Jay, life was a party. Now, actions speak of intentions, and so what is interesting in this case is that the direction Jay was headed in, I mean, from the Airbnb outside Muscat and the bus stop to the viewpoints, is essentially broadly the direction he continued on due west towards the sea. Jay, lost, disoriented, and dehydrated, followed what he thought was the path of least resistance down to the sea. Now, young people often do the same thing. When you're impulsive, when you're young, you're following paths of least resistance, feelings to get, you want to get to a certain feeling. How do you get to that feeling quickly and easily? Young people maybe want to get drunk, want to have fun. How do they do that? They drink, they have parties. It's kind of quite a simple thing. I also think that Jay's age and what comes with it is far more relevant than many people realized. According to the University of Rochester Medical Center, quote, recent research has found that adult and teens' brains work differently. Adults think with the prefrontal cortex, and, well, that is the brain's rational part. This is the part of the brain that responds to situations with good judgment and an awareness of long-term consequences. Teens process information with the amygdala. This is the emotional part. Now, I must say, it feels like a lot of people on my YouTube channel are teens, or certainly people who think like teens. They think emotionally. A lot of people, and yet I know that a lot of my followers are actually in their 40s and 50s. Now, in teens' brains, the connections between the emotional part of the brain and the decision-making center are still developing, and not always at the same rate. That's why when teens have overwhelming emotional input, they can't explain later what they were thinking. So even if you ask them, what was going on through your mind, they can't say, because they weren't thinking as much as they were feeling. We also know that on Monday morning, after 3 days and nights of raving, Jay was still on an emotional roller coaster. And so when he stepped out of the Airbnb, emotions continued to override rational decision-making. When Jay found himself at the viewpoint, all he had to do was turn back and return the way he had come. But there would be a few reasons why he didn't want to do that. One, it would be a long way to go back the way he'd come. Two, he was tired and thirsty and didn't want to waste more time. Three, he didn't go back the way he'd come for the same reason he didn't wait for the bus. He was impatient and impulsive. Four, Jay choosing to go with the two men to Muscat to begin with was impulsive. And five, Jay not wanting the night to end was not only impulsive, but the feeling part of who he was overriding everything else. Once in the mountainous landscape surrounding Muscat, Jay needed to come to grips with where he was and exit the feeling side of himself. Of course, if he was still intoxicated, then that wasn't going to happen. Walking into the dangerous wilderness, cascading and dropping around him, would be the equivalent of driving a tricky mountain pass at night, in the rain, on muddy roads, while drunk. What could go wrong? At 19 years old, just as we are meant to begin our lives outside of the school setting, beyond our parents, beyond, we need to start demonstrating our own agency. Kids can exude tremendous confidence. Kids also want to make their own decisions, and although that can lead to growth, it can also lead to disaster. So what Jay was trying to do might not make sense to you, but to 19-year-olds who tend to be more impulsive, who tend to specialize in taking shortcuts, sometimes with good results, sometimes not. Well, it was par for the course. A few years ago, I climbed one of South Africa's highest mountains, Monte Sources, with two Brits who did so while high on marijuana. And I remember the one guy realized he'd left his tent in the car when we got to the top of the mountain. Again, the folly of youth. Now, the final thing I want to say is quite an interesting insight. The fact that the dogs weren't able to find Jay. They should have been able to find him. Why couldn't they? I think that was actually a major insight into where Jay wasn't. Jay wasn't anywhere that a man or dog could access on foot. The dogs couldn't find Jay not because they lacked the skills, but because they simply couldn't get to the area. People couldn't either, which is why I think only once they winched people down into these inaccessible areas was Jay ultimately found. So I think fairly early on it was clear that where Jay is somewhere that's inaccessible. Otherwise he would have been found. So based on the dogs alone, based on their failure, we ought to have known that Jay was in an inaccessible area. And I think this channel certainly found our way there before the fact. Thank you for listening. Look out for the next analysis where we'll talk about adding insult to injury. Why is it so hard for us to accept this, even when we know what has happened? And I'll be dealing with that in the next episode. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.